What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Thursday edition of Back Your Play. Rich Quinones here. We got to talk baseball. It's been a minute. Our guy, Steve Gardner, a great baseball writer, USA Today, senior fantasy editor as well, at Steve A. Gardner. I feel like we run through the seasons and then it's like a relationship. We go and try to find each other, go away, and then we come back to each other. I missed you, my friend. I missed talking baseball with you. I hope you're doing well. It looks like you're doing well, but I'm so excited to have you back on.
Thanks so much, Rich. Yeah, and I feel the same. It's like going away to summer camp and seeing all the people that you were with, last summer and had a great time with. And it's like we never miss a beat, no matter how long the time is between the chances when we have to talk.
And we always have good debate and dialogue. All right, so I guess for you, my friend, it hasn't been a quiet offseason thus far. Listen, Aaron Judge breaks the bank, right? 360 million. Okay, so beyond the fact that it was kind of tweeted ahead of time that he might be going to San Francisco from, our contemporary, hey, that happens. All right, I get it, whatever. Did you ever get the sense, Steve, that he was, or I should say the Giants were really a serious player here? Or did you always believe that Judge was going to go back to the Bronx?
Well, can I say both? I thought the Giants were a serious player and that they thought that they had a chance to get him, to bring him back to Northern California. I mean, that's a little bit of a pull there. So if you're Aaron Judge, you have to listen to what they have to say. And we've seen the Yankees kind of botch some things, when they were dealing with Derek Jeter, that there was some concern about whether he would eventually re-sign or get, kind of miffed by the way that he was treated. And you could possibly say the same thing about Judge when they lowballed him at the beginning of last season. But as it turned out, the other part of that is Aaron Judge couldn't leave New York. I mean, the Yankees could not let that happen. And all of the other benefits of being a star in New York, the face of the franchise, possible captain, possible monument in Monument Park, all of that sort of stuff. He just cemented that legacy by setting the home run record for the American League and the franchise last year. And there was no way the Yankees, number one, could let him go from a public relations standpoint, but number two, from an actual baseball player standpoint, you could not replace him. No. There was no way. I mean, you could have all the money in the world and not be able to replace what he gave you and build your team if he wasn't there. So I think that's why I always thought that he would come back to New York this offseason.
Yeah, a couple great points you make, right? He bet on himself, so to speak, 7 years, 213. I'm just going to reject that. So I want to get your thoughts really just kind of on that courtship for a second, but I went back. 30 million club, right? It doesn't have a lot of members, so to speak. All the players involved in it basically put pen to paper in their 20s. Aaron Judge is 30 years old. So is there a concern? And at least of those that I mentioned, all 10 of them played at least 2 seasons of these types of deals in their 20s. Any concern here? I mean, we talked about this in the past with the Pujols and the Josh Hamiltons and the A-Rods. They're never really going to play the life of the contract, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. There's huge concern. And, Aaron Judge was able to stay healthy last year and give the Yankees a full season. It's no guarantee, especially somebody of his size. There's so many things that can go wrong. And so, more of him to hit with a pitch, that could cause trouble. So, I think that's a huge concern. And the Yankees were aware of that. But for them, I think it's well worth the risk because he's such a franchise icon, and it will probably turn ugly. He's probably not going to age super well. Just look at guys of his size. There aren't many of them anyway, but look how quickly Giancarlo Stanton went from a guy that was hitting 59 home runs was the National League MVP. Just 3 fewer than Judge. And, where is he? He's certainly not thought of as a top, 20 hitter right now, maybe top 30. I don't know, but, he's not as feared certainly as he once was. So yeah, I think this could go south pretty quickly. But for the Yankees, they had to make the play on the upside.
You mentioned from a PR standpoint, because think about it, right? I mean, if he's not in that lineup, if he's not wearing the uniform next year and he's out west, I mean, what kind of draw are you going to get? And
Yeah.
it's almost as though some Yankees fans that have tweeted me on social media, on Facebook, on IG, they feel like they actually acquired Judge. That's the feeling that they have when they didn't. I mean, this team still has needs. We'll get into a moment, but from a PR standpoint, how bad would it have looked if Steinbrenner's vacationing, having a little pasta, a little ravioli in Italy, and he decides, you know what, I'm not going to take that call. Wait until I get back. And then, like a thief in the night, Judge goes signs with San Francisco. I mean, you don't recover from a hit like that.
Absolutely not. And yeah, especially when the Yankees don't have anybody to pick up the mantle and be that face of the franchise. I mean, he's everything right now, from a player on the field and a personality off the field.
So we know about what happens with this team come October. If the bats go silent, you got to depend on the pitching. They need another starter. I know the name Rodon's been out there, Carlos Rodon, but what about in the outfield, right? If you think about it, you got Judge and right, you got Bader in center. You're going to need another left fielder. They went through, I think, 9 or 10 different players this year. They even used Oswaldo Cabrera, who's an infielder. So Can you think of any names that kind of stand out that maybe if they're going to go the free agent route? I was the guy that came to mind for me was Brian Reynolds.
He would be wonderful. They'd have to trade to get him though. And what assets? The Yankees have been very protective of their farm system and those guys coming up. I mean, talking about not signing a shortstop and going with Isaiah Kiner-Falefa last year, when they could have made a trade for a shortstop. They could have signed Corey Seager. They could have done Marcus Semien, any number of things. But all we heard was, Anthony Volpe is coming up, and we don't want to block him. So yeah, Brian Reynolds would be wonderful. Switch hitter. I think that it has to be, if you look at the construction of the roster right now, has to be somebody who hits left-handed.
Yeah.
Because that is just the lineup is just so heavily right-handed at the moment. I think maybe Andrew Benintendi needs to be thought of as somebody who is a solid player. I mean, he's not a superstar by any means, but you're not going to get any more superstars in the outfield through free agency. So yeah, just find somebody who can contribute. Hope Anthony Rizzo can, provide some left-handed pop as well, and take your chances and hope the pitching. I think that's where the upgrades are now.
Agree.
You need to find some, more pitching to be more consistent, because that's a meat grinder there in the AL East.
Yeah, we'll get to what Boston. And again, Thursday edition of BYP. Rich Quinones here. Steve Gardner joining us from USA Today. Does a great job covering the sport of baseball. Senior fantasy editor as well, and a reporter. All right, so the aforementioned Boston Red Sox. I mean, I don't know how you feel if you're a Boston. My buddy's a Boston Red Sox fan, and I got a text early this morning. He's like, "You got to be freaking kidding me!" With Bogarts, 11 years. What was it? 272, 280. I mean, that's a stunning deal. Think about this now with San Diego, right? Soto, Machado, Tatis Jr. I mean, wow. How about the fact that he leaves Boston, and if you really break it down a little more, he opts out with 3 years left on his contract?
Yeah, I think he always was going to opt out because his value was certainly high, and the Red Sox didn't seem to really want to engage with him, before everything, started, before the free agency excitement started. So I think they were prepared to lose him. But you look at what Boston has done. I mean, when Chaim Bloom came there as the GM, I mean, they had Mookie Betts, they had Bogarts, they had all, a lot of guys in their prime. And what do they have to show for that now?
Yeah.
I mean, Verdugo, Jeter, Downs. I don't know. I'm not really sure exactly what Boston is trying to do. and certainly don't know if they're succeeding in what they're trying to do.
Does the Yoshida signing? I mean, does that kind of move you at all?
I think he's a solid player, but more of an on base kind of guy who plays good defense. And I don't know how much that moves the needle. Certainly, it's not a 1-for-1, when you lose Xander Bogaerts.
Right.
And I think the real pressure now on the Red Sox front office is you better find a way to keep Rafael Devers, or else, where is this franchise? It's going to be a rudderless ship that's going to be out there being passed by everybody in the division. Baltimore is not the weak sister anymore, and the Red Sox found that out this year.
Yeah, Euros, of course. And you're right. You still have a major market in Boston, but yet forget about the payroll and the spending. People start to look at them, the mentality of a small market club.
Absolutely.
And that's never a good thing. All right. The Phillies, very busy with Walker, the righty. Obviously, the big move, Trey Turner, 11 years, $300 million. They also added a lefty. You look at that lineup. That's, again, going on the premise that you have a healthy Bryce Harper, but that's really scary lineup considering that it was a very unlikely run into the World Series against the Houston Astros. So again, I know we never really kind of talked numbers, so to speak, but that's a major signing by the Philadelphia Phillies, an aggressive one too.
It sure is. And the fact that, the Padres are even willing to pay him more to be on their club. And Trey Turner said, no, I like the East Coast better. And I think that was, from all indications, the primary reason, just coming back, spring training in Florida, where he's from. I think his wife is from New Jersey, that sort of thing. And it's huge windfall for the Phillies because it gives them maybe the number one shortstop in all of baseball right now. I mean, in terms of all the things that he can do, in terms of, just to throw this as an aside, in terms of fantasy sports, Trey Turner checks all the boxes. I mean, I think he could be, the number one fantasy player this season. So you get somebody who can play solid defense, who gives you somebody that can hit at the top of the order. I think that was one of the things too, when you're having Kyle Schwarber lead off for you. I don't think that's optimal. And and Trey Turner can do that. He's got some pop himself. But you love to get that guy getting the most at bats and most plate appearances of anybody because he will jumpstart the offense in any number of ways.
And that's what they needed. They were feast or famine. They were feast or famine, really, especially in the World Series. The bats just went silent at the most inopportune time. I like the Walker signing, 4 years, $72 million. You look at his ERA, 3.49. You look at his WHIP, 1.19, 132 strikeouts, I think 157 innings, well-traveled. But I kind of think that's a sneaky under-the-radar signing for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Well, when you've got Wheeler and Nola at the top of the rotation, just getting somebody who can slide in there and be consistent, kind of plug holes, stop losing streaks if need be. I mean, he's got that experience, and that certainly helps with the Phillies. And I know you got to love the top of the rotation, and he just fills it out so much better. And you don't have to rely on the guys, at the back end of the rotation. You take your fifth starter out, and maybe you skip him time through. I mean, that just lengthens their rotation, makes them much better. And they're going to need it. I mean, the National League East is pretty tough too.
That's why I always thought the Braves really were the team to kind of beat because of their offense and their pen and then the middle relief. And then we saw what happened with the Mets. I mean, oh my goodness. How would you like to be a Met fan right now? I mean, geez Louise. I mean, you lose the guy, right? I mean, I get it. They signed Verlander, 2 years. I'll pull the numbers up. I think it was 85, 86 million. But you lose DeGrom, and he played it perfectly. When you think about it, it's a 6-year vesting option that his contract could balloon money wise to 222. He gets 5 for 185. I mean, how do you? I know you can't really quote recoup the losses, but how crippling of a blow is that to the Mets starting rotation?
I'll tell you what. I don't know that it is as bad as it may seem because DeGrom, as great as he was, maybe the best pitcher at his peak that I've ever seen outside of Pedro Martinez, in the 99, 2000. I mean, he just was ridiculously unhittable.
Unhittable.
But the problem was the injuries kept him out for so
Yeah.
much of the time. And I think that's what the Mets front office was really worried about. And that will he be available all season for sure, but then in the playoffs when it really and you really have to have him. And when Justin Verlander comes in and is able to put together the season that he did last year and contribute in the playoffs, that I think the Mets, gave the Mets second thoughts about going all out to re-sign DeGrom. And when he went to Texas, it was an easy move for them because they were prepared to pay for a top-notch starter. They wanted it to be their guy, but if it wasn't, Justin Verlander was right there, and it was an easy pivot.
Do you believe that also Texas basically told them, here are the numbers, you know, take it or leave. You're not going to go back and use it as leverage.
Yeah, I think when Texas went to 5 years, and then you said there's the option there.
That's the option.
that was, thank you very much. There's almost no need because you knew the Mets weren't going to do that. At least I felt like it, and they just blew every other offer out of the water, and they did that last year with Corey Seager and Marcus Semien. So I think Texas has shown that they want to do whatever it takes to get back to being one of those elite playoff type teams. And certainly if you have DeGrom, you can do that.
Do you think there's any more domino effect shoe to drop in this offseason? I mean, or have we've seen the fireworks, right? Already in 24, 48 something odd hours.
I still think, what happens with Carlos Correa. I mean, the Giants still have money to spend.
Yeah.
And they want to get a marquee player. So what happens with Correa? What happens with Dansby Swanson? Those guys are really interesting to me at the top of the position player market. And then you talk about Rodon, talk about Chris Bassett, who's I think a very underrated pitcher. And we will see how much teams underrate him when he's close to the top of that free agent list. But those guys are interesting too. I don't know that we'll see. Obviously, the big names have created the huge fireworks, and Bogarts, I think, got a little bit more than maybe even I thought.
Yeah.
But Correa could be a $300 million guy too, and just depends. Whatever he does, I think sets the tone for the rest of the market.
Where do you think he winds up? With the Dodgers, with the Giants?
The Giants seem to be the logical spot, just because they were in play for Aaron Judge, didn't get him. Padres got their man, after whiffing on Turner, and making a run at Judge too. That was an interesting little twist.
Yeah, but real quick on the Padres, just to go back real quick on them, I feel as though here's $400 million. We're not even going to spend it judiciously. Like that, their approach, they're like the greedy little kid. Come Christmas time, he wants all the gifts, and I don't know if that was the right approach, so to speak. I never thought Judge was going to sign with San Diego.
Yeah, I didn't either. I think it was either go home or go back to the Yankees.
Correct.
So maybe he could have used the Padres as leverage, but no, I think the Padres, if you've got enough money to own a team, I think Joe Sheehan was probably the first person to put it this succinctly. If you've got enough money to own a Major League Baseball team, you got enough money to pay the players. If you want to get a player, you're going to be able to do that. I mean, the franchise values are going up, and us worrying about, multimillionaires and billionaires and how they spend their money, whether they're getting a good deal or not, is probably the least of our worries, or should be, as fans. So the Padres, even though, they're a small market, still it's Major League Baseball, and they just got a whole, every single team got $30 million each. free and clear this offseason when they sold off the last part of MLB Advanced Media.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the Padres, it's an interesting style, management style, and I think other teams are scared of that. They're scared of Steve Cohen going out and spending a lot of money with the Mets. And the other thing too is that on the Padres, Manny Machado does have like an opt-out, I think, at the end of this season or next season. So, all the worries about all these $300 million guys and a $280 million guy may turn out to be unfounded if Machado opts out.
I brought this up the other day on my other pod, 27 with Brandon Jacobs, who played for the Giants. I said, I used to be one of those guys on the radio that would, and I did it with you, just bark and scream about contracts. I don't give a crap anymore. Like, I don't, because it's a special and unique skill set, right? And if you're going to get paid, go get paid, which kind of leads me into this. Ohtani, I'm a big Ohtani fan. So
me too.
We talk about a special talent. Well, it's almost like two players in one. So as absurd as this sounds, can he be a $500 million player?
I would not say that is impossible. I think he truly could. I mean, you look at what he does, pitching and hitting, saves you a roster spot. I mean, how valuable is that? That's huge when you're trying to construct a roster and you only get 26 active spots. That's like giving you an advantage that nobody else in baseball has. So, yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking, I put up some numbers. Let's just say he's the first 500 million man. I mean, what are we talking? The Mets? We talking the Yankees?
Yeah, it's got to be, one of the huge, big spending teams with big
Crazy.
spending owners. And, if the Yankees are paying Aaron Judge all of this, will they want to commit to another even larger deal with Shohei Ohtani? I think the Mets have to be in consideration. And you know what? The Dodgers, for all of their spending that they've done and the acquisitions that, they're paying Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman, they still have a lot of room under the luxury tax and a lot of maneuverability. So when you take a team that is, that established, that big of a market, the TV deal that they have is huge. The Dodgers could certainly be in play. And if you're Ohtani and you've, gotten used to living in Southern California, going from the Angels to the Dodgers would be easy as pie.
Same traffic. Trout, 12 years, $426.5 million. That's his contract. Highest paid player in MLB when it comes to overall contract value. Okay. But going back to Ohtani, if you look at it from a pure market standpoint, right? So as a hitter alone, right? To me, that's where the astronomical value is. Then you throw in the pitching is not primary, it's secondary. But then you also have to worry about he's 28 years old.
Yeah. All the check boxes there. The only thing, I mean, the one drawback about Ohtani though is if he gets hurt and can't play at all, then you lose a hitter and a pitcher. I mean, that's crippling to your lineup and your roster. So, I mean, there's a little bit of risk there, but everything else, for all he brings, it's amazing. And his worth off the field too, I think will be huge from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great point. Get a couple minutes with our guy, Steve Gardner, talking a little baseball. Rich Quinones here, Thursday edition of BYP. All right, we got to close with this contemporary baseball era players committee. My guy, Fred McGriff, finally, 16 of 16 votes. Should have never come to this. However, this is what I want to discuss with you.
Okay.
Mattingly, Schilling, Murphy, Bell, Bonds, Clemens, and Rafael Palmeiro, fewer than 4. Mattingly 8, Schilling 7, Murphy 6. We'll get to them in a moment. McGriff, when you look at his resume and the era in which he played in, and some will argue compiler, long years, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that. I look at the era, I look at the numbers, I look at the consistency as well. You know, what word or adjectives to describe him come to your mind? And is he worthy of this induction?
Yes. I think of Fred McGriff, I think of steady and, somebody
Perfect.
that you could count on every single year. And you look at the numbers, I'm trying to think if he hit 40 home runs in a season, he might've had 41 or 42, but he was always in that 30s, mid 30s. And then when you start getting, the performance enhancing drug guys coming in and blowing that out of the way, he was still as consistent as ever. And I think that's why, people respected him even more, because he could have done all of that too, and maybe hit 40 or 50 or something like that, but he didn't. And I think that's where he got overshadowed by a lot of the guys on the ballot. The ballots were crowded when he was being considered, and never got more than like 40% from the baseball writers. But in retrospect, after all of this, shakes out, we appreciate Fred McGriff an awful lot more. And he was somebody, led the Braves to the World Series.
That's what I was going to say.
Was
That
great in the
acquisition.
postseason.
Yeah, he was, I think it was 93, 94. He went on a tear. I think he had like 8 home runs in the postseason. His numbers for his career, 493. The most he hit, he had a stretch, 34, 36, 35, 31, 35, 37. That's a nice stretch.
Yeah.
That's a
And
nice
the other
stretch.
thing too is that he was really hurt. Maybe, it may have cost him with the writers even, when the strike came in and wiped out part of the 94 season,
94
and then
season.
the beginning of the 95 season. If he's playing, obviously he's going to get those 7 home runs that he needs to get to 500.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
maybe passes that significantly. And, are we having this discussion if he's over 500, from the voting back in the day? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. What strike was what? 90?
94 was the one that cost us the World Series. And then I think it extended into, it cost some games in the 95 season.
In the 95 season, yeah, 94 strike. Because I just put up his numbers. Still 34 home runs. And here's another thing too. The slugging percentage and his batting average, he was about a 285, 290 lifetime hitter. So I'm happy for him. So let me give you two players. I'm just going to read you the stats.
Okay.
All right. One player played 14 years, had over 2,100 hits, over 200 home runs, over 1,000 ribbies, 307 average, was an MVP, Gold Glove, and a 6-time All-Star. The other player played 12 years, 2,300 hits, 207 homers, over 1,000 ribbies, 11-time All-Star, finished in the top 10 in MVP voting 7 times, and batted .318. One of those players is in the Hall of Fame, and the other isn't. And I have a feeling you know which two I'm talking about.
Well,
go ahead.
I would say, go ahead and tell me. One of them's Mattingly.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
And who has pretty much one of the most comparable stat-wise careers to Mattingly, and they played at the same time. Great player, passed away too young.
I don't know. I don't want to give you too much dead air. Go ahead and hit me up.
We don't worry about that. Kirby Puckett.
Puckett. Okay.
So why is Mattingly kind of that? You only gave us 3 to 4, 5 years, but yet when you played, you were arguably the best player in baseball. Does it hurt? The lack of postseason gets in 1 year. They lose to Seattle, the back injuries. Oh, look at that.
My cat is here.
See that? He knows. The cat
Yeah,
knows too. The
you tell
cats
him.
know when they sense the BS, they come out. That's fantastic.
That's
Why is
right.
Natalie not in?
I guess it's just, the lack of counting stats and the injuries and not being on the field as much. It, maybe too, the standards are higher at first base. You have to be, even greater, because that's a position where you have all the sluggers and all that sort of stuff.
So any of those guys that I mentioned, aside Bonds and Clemens for a minute,
Mhm.
Bell, Murphy, Schilling, Rafael Palmeiro, do you think they warrant induction in the Hall of Fame, their careers?
I'll tell you, I pretty much all of those guys, the number of players of the era that you and I have watched baseball
Yeah.
versus the number of players from the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and 20s, the differences in percentages and stuff in the Hall is great. And I think we need more players that we have seen. I would have no problem any of those guys that were on the contemporary ballot getting in, to tell you the truth. I think they were all great players, all deserving of consideration. And I mean, Dale Murphy was a guy that I
Yep.
idolized when I was growing up. I mean, like, he was the great. I watched him on TBS
Probably
because,
played on the wrong era.
yeah, and he was fabulous to
Yep.
watch. And so I kind of have a soft spot for Dale Murphy as well. Maybe, correlation with Mattingly with you. So yeah, I think the Hall of Fame, though, has set it up to where the veterans committees are not going to be able to induct multiple players.
Right.
They only get 3 votes. They can only vote for a maximum of 3 out of those 16 players. You
Pardon.
do the math, and you have 8 candidates, and all of them have to have, at least some worth to where, they could get a few votes. But if they do that, you almost need, a 16-0, a
Yep.
unanimous vote to get somebody in from those committees. So it's going to be tough for guys that weren't voted in, the Mattingleys and the Murphys and all those guys. It's going to be tough for them. It's going to be tough for the Kenny Loftons and the Lou Whitakers and guys that,
Whitaker.
we talk about as great players as well, that probably deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, I think that's, the Hall is setting things up the way that it wants. And I think, it's that small hall versus big hall debate. And, I think when I first started covering baseball, I was in the small hall camp, that only the best of the best. And now I think I'm at the opposite end of the
Right.
spectrum. I want to see guys that I saw play in the Hall of Fame.
Does it make it watered down?
I mean, maybe, but they're still all great players, though.
But is it
And
Hall
I
of
think,
Fame or Hall of Great?
well, when you have, Rabbit Moranville and,
Yeah.
guys like that in there, I don't know those guys. I don't know if they were great or they were, super, exceptional. But I know that Lou Whitaker was a darn good baseball player, and Kenny Lofton was really good, and Dwight Evans was really good,
Yeah.
and Bobby Grich was really good. And when we
Greg
can look at,
Nettles. Greg
yeah,
Nettles.
yeah, I mean, guys like that. So it's kind of sad for me to see. I mean, even though I didn't vote for Bernie Williams, he was a very good player too.
Great
And
Yankee, but as a Yankee guy, not a Hall of Famer.
yeah,
But
but
to
I
your
mean,
point, I know what you're saying.
yeah, I like to see, more debate, and I don't know if anybody's going to get in this coming year either. But I'm willing to vote for Scott Rowland and Todd Helton. I think those guys, were fantastic baseball players, and I'd like to see them in.
You would vote, you would Roland, I can see Helton, Hitters Friendly Park.
he was, I mean, he was consistent. Like, I'll tell you, that's a nice parallel with Don Mattingly, with the how consistent those guys were. And it didn't really get a chance to see a lot of postseason action.
How about a guy like Jeff Kent then?
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit
We
about
have.
Jeff Kent, and I've always been a no on Jeff Kent because all he did was hit and did not have the base running, the defense, and was not the complete player that that I feel like you need to have to be in the Hall of Fame. So he's certainly borderline. I just come down on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, he had the one monster year and he won the MVP. It's a good point. It's just unfortunate, right? Because some of these guys, it's almost like the Terrell Davis syndrome, but
Mm-hmm.
had that brief flicker in the moment. But when you played, and then in your playoffs, Gale Sayers, you look at his numbers, the injuries, but yet when he played, he was one of the best players
Mm-hmm.
on the field. And we'll close with this, and I know we always talk about this. I still believe when you talk about all these players and we talk about the steroid, and you know what, I can go through a list of a lot of players in the Hall of Fame that were not nice people.
Mm-hmm.
So, who are we to be the morality police? Like, I'm starting to really soften, even with like Pete Rose. I've gone back and I've really looked at the guys he played with, like the great players in the mid 60s to the late 70s, his prime, so to speak. I'm not talking like an older Rose goes to the Phillies and then later on with the Reds, and pretty much all she wrote. And it's like it's just I was so adamant because of what he did, and now you start to take a step back, and if the floodgates open for guys that were injecting themselves, then how do you keep a guy like Pete Rose out?
Well, I don't know that the floodgates are going to open.
Yeah, I mean, I think
because
eventually they will, Steve. I think the younger, guys like you and I, the old school guys, I think the younger reporters, the younger writers, the younger voters that may come about, I think, and this is just me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think they'll be a little more liberal with that, and they'll start voting for some of these guys.
Well, I mean, I can see that happening. The interesting thing, and this is going to take us into a different tangent,
Go ahead.
but here's a thought that I've tried to bounce this off people who know a lot of baseball and have a good perspective, so it fits right in with you. What about Fernando Tatis? His career has just gotten started.
Yep.
And he has this PED suspension. There were some excuses, all that sort of stuff. Whatever. He's in his early 20s.
Yep.
What happens, if Fernando Tatis says, I made a big mistake and I'll never do that again, and then goes on and has the Hall of Fame type career that we think somebody with his skills could, do you hold that against him for something? Do you treat him the same as we've treated Rafael Palmeiro, for instance, who does something at the end of his career and throws suspicion on maybe everything that he has done before that? Do you hold that against Fernando Tatis when he may, win 4 MVP awards or something like that and keep him out of the Hall of Fame? I mean, that's a question I sort of have wrestled with as a Hall of Fame voter. I mean, can I really reject him out of hand just because of this particular instance? And I think what you were talking about, some of the younger writers that are coming in might be more forgiving in terms of, what happens beyond for guys like Tatis. And then by, the chain of command or whatever back, A-Rod and things that that did with A-Rod, because A-Rod's going to be on the ballot for a while too.
I think it's a great question, but to kind of illustrate your point, you're talking about a player that's been in baseball for 3 years, right? And you're comparing a guy like, say, Rafael Palmeiro, who did it at the end of his career because he wanted to elongate his career. He wanted to keep playing, so to speak. I'm of the belief, and this is just me, if you come out and you want to make amends and knowing how the drug testing is even going to be stronger going forward, right? He's not going to make that mistake again, because you realize
Right.
you would lose your career,
Mhm.
hundreds of millions of dollars, and that would be all she wrote. A guy like Palmera, the thing that really sticks with me is when he basically went like this
Yeah,
to Congress,
exactly.
right?
Mhm.
You know, and he was a Hall of Famer. You can really make a case before that day and before
Right.
the Mitchell report and all those names came about.
3,000 hits, 500 home runs. I mean, that's a
When
slam dunk, right?
see, and it kind of goes back, and we kind of go in a circle here with Pete Rose. If Pete Rose,
Mhm.
30 something odd years ago on Nightline, basically comes clean, then we're probably not even having the conversation anymore, right? But he was adamant. It was the hill, no pun intended, that he chose, that he was going to die on. He
Yep.
didn't do this. And a guy like, and a young kid like Tatis, look, you make amends, and we know how the drug testing is now. And if he goes and still puts up numbers, it's like Ryan Braun. How would you look at him?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I would say for a player like Tatis, I would be a little more lenient and forgiving. See, the whole thing is,
It's tough, isn't it?
it is, because I have a kind of still a sour taste in my mouth with baseball because of 98, where everyone kind of knew. Like, you're like,
Mhm.
look, Sosa, McGuire, come on, these guys got to be juicing, but this is a hell of a ride, and baseball's cramming it down our throats, and chicks dig the long ball, and they brought the game back, but they did it under these false pretenses of that they cheated, and it wasn't natural. And it was, you want to bring the young kids to fans, and maybe I'm too romantic about this. You want to do it. You're like, the game is, it's what's the word? It's the innocence of the game,
Mhm.
to romanticize about it. But yet, yeah, these two guys that are breaking records left and right, and then Bonds as well, and they're not doing it in a clean fashion. But baseball still wanted you to go to the ballpark, and these two saved the game, but they did it under such a dark cloud. Like, it's the contradiction, I guess, is what I'm saying. The
Yes,
hypocrisy.
absolutely.
It's still, and me, I'm a baseball guy. I love the history of the sport. I've lessened my stance with certain things, right? And I know you're a Hall of Fame voter. Now, is that the same? Your vote with the contemporary baseball era players? It's all under one umbrella, or no?
No, no. The hall picks the contemporary committee
Got
of
you.
16. So it's players, it's executives and historians, and there could be, I think there were like 3 members of the media out of the 16 who served on that committee to vote.
So, would you vote for Pete Rose?
Here's what I would do with Pete Rose. I would put him in the Hall of Fame and have on his plaque. I mean, the Hall of Fame is a museum that
Yeah,
tells the story of baseball. And Pete Rose, you can't talk about the history of baseball without
bingo.
including the guy that got more hits than anybody else in the entire history of the game. So he should be in there, and his plaque should say was banned from baseball for wagering and betting on baseball as a manager when he had a hand in the outcome of the game
Okay.
and violated the tenet, the unwritten, or the number
Yeah.
one
Yep.
rule on the list that you can't violate. He did it.
Then if you do that for Pete Rose, because that's still a form of cheating, having somewhat of a competitive edge, we don't know. No, those skeletons, that's like where Capone is buried, right? I mean, it's just, when he'll go to his grave, we'll never really know if he managed games in a way that he bet on, right? We just kind of gloss over it, so to speak. So if you go on
Mhm.
that premise, then if you stick the A-Rods in, the Bonds in, the Clemens in, then you also have to take that same argument you're making and put
Mhm.
that on their plaque too.
I would definitely do that. I would do that as well. I think you have to have Barry Bonds in there, and you've got to have Roger Clemens. Nobody's won more MVPs, nobody's won more Cy Youngs, nobody's hit more home runs in their careers, and And we've talked about those guys in the actual Hall of Fame voting, and how the reasons why I voted for them, when they were on the ballot.
Yeah.
And I think that the big point in all of that is that baseball itself, and Bud Selig in particular, as you said, was perfectly fine
Of
with
course.
those guys hitting all those home runs, generating all that publicity, bringing all those folks to the ballpark to see, the
Yep.
the ball fly, 500 feet or whatever, because that was good for the money,
Yeah.
good for the game, and good for the marketing, and that's that's part of the game too.
Yeah. I told him I only needed him for 15, 20 minutes, but as the case, we always run very long because it's great, great conversation. Steve Gardner from USA Today, at Steve A. Gardner, baseball writer, reporter, senior fantasy editor, USA Today. Give him a follow, and Hall of Fame voter as well. I am absolutely extremely pleased I got you back on. I know I always like to, because when I emailed you, and I text you, I'm like, well, sometimes if we just keep going, we just keep going. But it's always fascinating conversation, my friend. I look forward to getting you on a lot more. I appreciate you joining me for a couple moments.
Absolutely, anytime, Rich. This is always a fun conversation,
sir.
and yeah, we never know exactly where it's going to go. So
No.
that's what's fun about it.
I appreciate it, Steve. We'll talk along the way, pal. Be well.
Thanks so much, Rich. Take
All
care.
right, there you have it. So fantastic stuff as always with Steve. We appreciate him jumping on board for a couple moments. And don't forget, everyone, as I mentioned, we'll put this up on the YouTube channel. You can also hashtag back your play, and we're brought to you by our good friends over at Spooky Express. Give Steve a follow as well, at Steve A. Gardner. He's absolutely fantastic. He is really, really fantastic. Just, the outside the box thinking when you start to get into baseball and you start to break down these numbers, and we look at it from a stat standpoint, a money standpoint, a Hall of Fame standpoint. Fascinating stuff. So as we mentioned, Judge, Yankees, Walker, Turner to the Phillies, Boston with some big moves, San Diego with some big moves. We'll put everything up on the podcast. We'll also put it up on Buzzsprout, Amazon, Spotify, Apple as well. Tomorrow we'll talk NFL. We'll get in a little college hoops. Don't forget, we'll do it around 5 to 6 Eastern time. And as we always like to say, if you say it, you play it, because what's going to happen, folks? You're going to be able to stack it after you back it. So as always, we appreciate you tuning in to this edition of Back Your Play. Enjoy your sports Thursday. We'll talk to you Friday.